the the scary alternative, the different ways it has evolved throughout history. Some of it has led to wars. What are the future trajectories that lead to a potential war with China? Cold War or hot war? Is this something you think about? Is this something you're worried about?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about both wars. So the war with China, as I say, there are five kinds of wars. There's a trade war, technology war, geopolitical influence war, capital war, and military war. As far as military war goes, I think it's only a Taiwan issue, but that's a big issue, and we could talk about that for a minute. But those others, they'll be rough competitions, and we'll have that type of evolution over a period of time. That's what that war looks like. Taiwan has been, for a long time, a sovereignty issue to China. And it has its roots in what's called the 100 Years of Humiliation. From the 1840s to 1949, foreign powers came in, took advantage of China. They had the Opium Wars and such times, and that represented the 100 years of humiliation. And Taiwan is their sovereignty and their important thing. And for 50 years ago, starting 50 years ago, there was an agreement that there is one China and Taiwan is part of China, and that there would be peaceful reunification. The peaceful reunification hasn't happened, and in their view, that's a very big issue. And so it's a big contentious issue. And that could produce a military war, could produce a military accident, it's a very tense situation. And if we had a military war, God help us, because of the capacity in all different new ways to inflict harm on each other. But anyway, that's that. If you don't have that military war, you'll have the competition between those other kinds of wars, and whoever is strongest in those areas will win.
Where do you put cyber war within the five?
Well, cyber war is a military war. I'm assuming the type of cyber war that you're referring to is that which it's used to inflict pain on the other party through cyber. So cyber wars, you'll see cyber war. You could see space war. You can see drone warfare. New types of warfare, not just the traditional and nuclear type of warfare. But you could see any of the above.
What are the defining characteristics? What are the interesting things about Xi Jinping, the president of China, as a leader on the world stage?
His father was a early leader. He was himself in the Cultural Revolution at times treated brutally. And during that period of time, it was very, very difficult. And he came up, through the ranks, and he's a very intelligent man. When he first came to power, as you know, they have 2 5-year terms. And we're now coming to the end of the second of those 5-year terms. When he first came to power, he felt that there should be a lot of reform, and reform meant moving to much more of a market and open economy. When that happened, him coming in, I had some contact with economic policymakers, and the circumstances then were that 5 major banks lent to state-owned enterprises and local governments with implied government guarantees. And so there was not control of that, and the movement to a more of a market economy, and the development of markets was a primary, and also the dealing with the corruption issue. There was a lot of corruption prior to that, and that was viewed as an existential threat to the system. So that became the primary objective. And then as time progressed over those 10 years, there was a lot of changing in the world, their financial circumstances, opening many, many other markets. They particularly getting money to small and medium-sized enterprises and developing a lending system and then establishing controls on it. So right now, there's a vibrant capital markets. You can raise capital, you can be an entrepreneur, you can become a billionaire in the capital markets. And they developed the markets to be the second largest capital markets. At the same time, they had to deal with their rising debt issue, which they began to deal with really about 4 years ago when the second term began, and then Liu He became the vice premier responsible for that and to deal with those issues. So you see right now that what's happening is the dealing with the real estate bubble. There was a development in real estate, a bubble, which produced a lot of unproductive lending. And Xi Jinping said, houses are meant to live in, not to speculate on. And so that was wasteful. So they established what they call 3 red lines, which are financial ratios that the property developers had to live within. And that is then causing the adjustments that are going on now, which in my view are very healthy because whenever there's bankruptcies and so on, the most in the public think, okay, that's a problem. It's in many cases really a cleaning up of bad debts and bad practices. And so that's what's going on. So that's, let's say, economically. At the same time, there is the changing relationships, the changing world order, the changing relationships with the United States and other countries, which is becoming much less cooperative and much more warlike, much more confrontational. Those two things, the domestic debt problem and the domestic, has led to what they call core leadership, which means a leadership more around him that is less challenging, because they believe in history that during very difficult times, a more centrally controlled decision-making process lends itself better than to a more fragmented political contentious project. And that's basically what's going on now.
You said it very eloquently, but you mean the leadership is surrounded by yes men and there's a lot of centralized control.
That characterization is much more black and white than it really is.
But it leans towards that direction.
There, like, for example, of the standing members of the Politburo, 4 are more allied to him, 3 are less so. You have to understand that it's kind of a collective leadership at the top. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's just jockeying for power, in a highly political sense at the top. But no one leader can be successful against all those powers at the top. So it's very politically negotiating. It's very much more like if you put in the United States the Democrats and the Republicans, and they had to be in the same government and they work it out. It's kind of something like that. And so that's that struggle, but it's an internal struggle.